A hung parliament it ain't. Emmanuel Macron converting the try of last month's presidential election in France that blew away the mainstream center-left and center-right blocs with a first-round legislative result that's already redrawn the country's political landscape. The outgoing socialist majority in tatters. The conservative Les Républicains party split, and Macron's brand-new centrist party, which is only a few months old, now on track to win a landslide. Just how big a mandate? The opposition points to a record abstention rate. But surveys suggest that its opposition supporters are the ones who stayed home. Does that mean it's a tacit endorsement of France's 39-year-old president, or disillusion with a winner-takes-all democracy? Macron's strength is in stark contrast with Theresa May's weakness this Monday, who comes out of a snap poll with a hung parliament. Is Macron's momentum also that of Europe's right now? What does it mean for Brexit and for the future of the EU? Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking where Macron's momentum will lead France. And with us, Macron supporter Lex Paulsen, who teaches at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. Thank you for being with us again.
Nice to be back.
We welcome as well Majid Messaouden, municipal councillor in the northern Paris suburb of Saint-Denis.
Good evening.
With the Front de Gauche, the left-wing party.
Doesn't really exist now because Mélenchon has killed the Front de Gauche.
Jean-Luc Mélenchon, the leader.
He's a political killer.
Okay, and he's running in Marseille, the head of.
Yeah.
We'll talk about the divisions within the left and the shape of the left coming up. We'll also talk about the divisions and the shape of the right. Bruno Bernard is a member of the Républicains party, which had a crisis meeting this morning and basically said they're going to have another one next week after the second.
Usually what happens when you lose an election.
France 24 Europe editor Yves Irvine is here as well, and Yves' eye is important because, again, it's the context of what's going on here in relation to what's going on elsewhere on this continent of ours. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter. Hashtag F24debate with a two-round system. France finds itself with a president whose party is on 32% of the vote, an 8-point rise over the first round of the presidential election. But in numbers of seats, come next Sunday at 8 p.m., Macron's party could have, this is an estimation, could have 3/4 of the legislature. Remember that the previous National Assembly had 295 socialists. So if you look at the numbers there, the socialists are going to struggle even to form a parliamentary group. And after a presidential race where the National Front garnered a third of the vote, the far right could be reduced to somewhere between 1 and 5 seats. The government spokesperson, Christophe Castaner, on track to win in his district in the Alps, says Macron's momentum has grown since the presidential vote.
The people who elected Emmanuel Macron didn't necessarily want him during the first round, and we had political extremes which were very popular, even though that changed on Sunday. So we need to address those people, those men and women who showed their anger and who need to be confident again. So the President of the Republic and the government need to answer their questions. If we want to make people confident, if we want to achieve the objective set by Emmanuel Macron, which is to ensure that the extreme parties lose popularity within 5 years, then we need concrete answers which address people's needs on a daily basis.
So Lex Paulsen, he's saying two things there. On the one hand, he's saying our voters turned out, and he's also saying we have to still convince people to, as he calls it, reduce the extremes.
Yeah, I think both of those tendencies was very much on display yesterday, where you had many hundreds of new candidates who had never been involved in politics before mobilizing around this idea of renewal and renouvellement, which I think has brought new voters to the polls and brought new energy in the grassroots. But at the same time, there's a lot of skepticism of, as shown by the high abstention rate, meaning that there are a lot of voters who are in a wait-and-see mode, who are waiting for concrete action by this government and whether he's going to be more to the right or more to the left, and maybe they stayed home or may even keep their vote back on next Sunday. So I think there's a lot of work to be done to convince the people who have not yet supported an En Marche candidate to do so.
Christophe Castaner basically implying, Majid Messaouden, that he's more popular today than he was on election day when he was elected himself.
Yeah, what happened yesterday was unbelievable for me because you feel that En Marche was the only credible tool to get rid of the socialists and of the conservatives. So I think that what happened yesterday was something I could not imagine 2 months ago or 3 months ago.
You didn't see this coming?
No, not that much.
So how do you explain it?
Well, I explain by the importance of the right and of the socialists to make really changes in the country. And I think that people decided not to vote for the extremes. And the only one who appeared to be able to do so was Emmanuel Macron. I don't believe he will succeed because his majority will be huge, but I don't think it will be stable. And he will need a very stable majority to achieve his promises. The problem.
So hang on, you're saying he'll have a huge majority, but they'll be infighting quickly within it?
I think, because many of them are new will be new MPs, and I think that they will get power into this assembly. So you can have many games inside. So I don't think that the group En Marche will still be the same in 1 year or in 2 years. So you can't have changes inside this political majority. But what I can notice about what happened yesterday is also that you were talking about renewal, but how many workers in the future majority of En Marche? They are all issued of civil society, but many of them are lawyers. Many of them are from the highest social class, as we say. So I don't think that this majority will represent France as it is really. And I just want to add that in what we call the social working class neighbors, the abstention was very high. In my city, it was like 70% of abstention. And I think that Emmanuel Macron should be aware of that and should take into account that this abstention has a political sense, political meaning.
Well, I was at the headquarters today. I can assure you that there's no complacence, and there's no sense of the battle being won. When it comes to diversity, I think maybe you exaggerate slightly the degree to which. I mean, I'm a lawyer myself, and I recognize there is a bad reputation in our profession. No, but I think, and honestly, I've been on the ground with some of these candidates who are social workers, who are teachers, who are students even, and people in their 20s. So I think there's a bit more diversity in these new crop of MPs than you might say. But you rightly say that diversity could be a challenge as well as an asset. And the fact that there are people coming from the right, coming from the left, coming from these different walks of life, it will have to be a very carefully managed conversation within the parliamentary group to be really pulling on the intelligence of everybody and not dictating down. I think it's going to be a major challenge this year.
All right, the big shocker from the first round, a record abstention rate, as Majid Messaouden was saying, more than 1 in 2 voters staying away from the polls. Now it's about that final week of campaigning. Solange Mougin has more.
With the first round marked by one of the highest abstention rates in decades, the next week will be about getting out the vote. Across the political spectrum, candidates and their supporters have vowed to drum up support.
Thank you. Now let's get to work.
I'm going to go door to door, which is what I did in the beginning to convince people one by one. We really need to tell people that there's another way. We need to fight this apathy.
Sunday's first round was actually a done deal in a few races this time. French voting rules let candidates win the election after the first round if they win over 50% of the vote. That only happened in 4 races on Sunday, compared to 36 in the last elections. Another shift in voting patterns was in 3-way races. Candidates who receive at least 12.5% of the vote go on to the second round. In most races, that means 2 finalists, but sometimes there are 3 or even 4 who make the cutoff. In 2012, there were 34 3-ways. This year, there was only 1. That may be in part because Emmanuel Macron's party has redefined political lines.
When Republic on the Move candidates are against a right-wing candidate, the left votes for them and they win. When they are against a left-wing candidate, voters on the right back them and they win. The key to their victories is that they do not lean left or right, which is extraordinary.
With a redefined political landscape, how novice and women candidates fare is also another element to keep an eye on. 245 women candidates have made it to the second round, which means that there is a record number of women who could soon be elected to Parliament.
Bruno Bernard, what's your prediction regarding next Sunday in terms of turnout? Is it going to be the same?
More or less. I don't really see why people would turn out more. I mean, people from the Républicains or the Socialists, I mean, the deal is done.
And you heard in that...
You say there's no complacency, and maybe there isn't, but, I mean, En Marche has won, and they will have an overwhelmingly big majority.
We heard in that report political scientist Dominique Régnier talking about, well, if somebody's left-wing and it's a right-wing candidate versus somebody from Macron's party, they're going to vote for Macron. And if it's a left-wing candidate and someone's from the right, they're going to vote for Macron as well, and therefore he gets a huge majority. But is it also the fact that, well, France is awakening to the fact that it's a social democracy that has a large center, but it always sort of denied it. You always were labeled left or right, and you didn't want to admit that, you know, social democracy.
And you're right in a sense, because in English you always say the centre-right party or the centre-left party, but when you speak to our colleague here and you talk about Les Républicains, he won't call it a centre-right party, he will call it the hard right. And if I...
Not the far right.
Not the far right, the hard right. But if I talk about La France Insoumise, the new name of, what was it, the Front Gauche, I'll speak about the far left, l'extrême gauche in French, and not the centre-left. So the thing is that we are a social democracy, but which was different to what we have in Britain, for example, or in Sweden, or in any European countries, because we had that Gaullist element within the French right that has unfortunately completely gone now.
Is France still different?
In many, many ways, and notably in those two elections that we've seen this week, I think it's also, the fact that they didn't have a centre party. But we saw that a bit in the UK as well, and a lot of people are saying that that's where, Labour in particular across in the UK lost this election. They didn't move back to that centre ground and take that over. And it's something we're seeing across the EU, actually, when you look at the Netherlands as well in March that had their elections. Again, people were moving to kick the system in a way, or to kick the traditional parties that have been in power for many decades, and anybody moving toward that centre ground was definitely picking up the votes.
The centre is the place from which to fight
I think
against...
a short while ago it was the extremes, and that's where you saw a rise of a lot of populist extreme far-right parties. That was seen as a vote of protest to a certain extent, and it also gained a legitimate support. You know, a lot of people breathed a sigh of relief in the Netherlands once again when Geert Wilders, the far-right anti-EU candidate, didn't become the biggest party in Parliament, but he did gain seats, while the centre-right, or moving slightly more to the right, VVD party of Mark Rutte, retained its position, and he is still Prime Minister, but lost in the amount of seats he has in Parliament.
The Prime Minister, in his election night speech, talked about, he said, France is back.
France is back, and perhaps, and that's maybe my
what does that mean?
Editor hat reading into it, because Emmanuel Macron was really quite exceptional in French elections, is that as soon as he became candidate, he ran on a very pro-EU platform, which I certainly haven't seen in all my years living in France. And I haven't really seen many French politicians even put the EU as part of their manifesto or campaign agenda since the 2005 referendum, where the French rejected at the time the constitution for the EU. Emmanuel Macron says he will relaunch the Franco-German partnership. He will reform the EU and put France very much at the centre and core and a large motor of that EU.
All right. The system, though, is, some are saying rigged, in fact, rigged towards the party that wins the presidential election. Most bitter are supporters of the far-right National Front. A lot of them didn't turn out to vote. They could have possibly just one seat in the next parliament, that of the leader of the party, Marine Le Pen.
They make a good point. I mean, and this is a structural problem in France as well as in the U.S., where the Democrats in America won more votes, both for the presidency and in 2014 for Congress, and yet the Republicans made a majority and won the White House.
So you agree with her it's unfair if her party wins 11 million votes in the second round of the presidential election, winds up with one seat in Parliament?
I think the French are actually much more open to making these kinds of constitutional improvements, and I think that adding what we call a dose of proportion to electoral system to make the parliament more representative could be good. It won't happen sooner than 5 years, but it could be it could be an interesting way to go, and certainly something that America could very much benefit from.
The funny thing is that it will be Emmanuel Macron who's now saying that we must fight the extremes that could introduce about 50 to 100 National Front MPs in 5 years. So I agree. I mean, the French system has been designed to be effective. That's all it was meant to do under General de Gaulle. That's why we have the Fifth Republic. So what the French have decided is to give Emmanuel Macron a majority. Those who didn't vote for Macron are, as you said, staying put and leaving them just to implement his promises and his platform. And
do you agree with Lex that it is a good idea to have a mixed system, a dose of proportional representation with constituencies that nonetheless remain?
I don't think so, because in the end you could end up with a huge instability, and also the fact that you can have second-rate MPs, those elected on a proportional basis, and those on the current system. So I think the Fifth Republic is very effective in delivering. The thing is, well, we're not in a majority anymore, so we don't like it now. But I think still, it's a good system.
Majid Messaouden? Leave the system as it is, or do you agree with Lex on this one?
I think that when Lionel Jospin decided to reverse the electoral sequence, it was a very bad decision, and we see it today. So we are in a presidential regime.
It made sense. I mean, to have the presidential in a presidential regime like France. I mean, it made sense to elect first the president and then have the parliamentary elections.
I don't think so. You see it now, because we are going to French people are going to vote for like 400 people for Emmanuel Macron. He will have the full power to govern without any debate in the parliament. Without any debate in the parliament. And I think that this is not a good thing for our democracy.
No, you're right. I mean, it's true that the presidential elections have a tendency of killing those parliamentary elections.
So I think we need a new republic, the Sixth Republic, and we have to fight for that. But I think that Emmanuel Macron, he's living on a...
But Sixth Republic, would that mean proportional representation?
Yeah, I think we need at least a dose of proportional in the election.
So you
of the
agree
parliament.
with what Macron is proposing?
Yeah, of course.
All right,
and I think that if we have 50 MPs from the National Front, we'd have to assume it collectively, because everybody is responsible for the level of the National Front today. All of us, the Conservatives, the Socialists, En Marche, everybody is responsible.
But those who have changed the rules might be more responsible.
Yeah, but
who represents France? The question we'll pick up on when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.
Hello and welcome back to the France 24 newsroom. I'm Rochelle Ferguson-Biahi. These are the top stories this hour. After round one of parliamentary elections, President Macron's Républicains En Marche party and its ally Modem look set to clinch a landslide victory. Macron's rivals, though, argue with such an overwhelming majority, there's little room for democratic debate. Theresa May apologises to Conservatives and tells them she'll serve as UK Prime Minister for as long as they want her to. This after a botched election gamble cost the party its majority in Parliament. A Russian court sentenences opposition leader Alexei Navalny to 30 days in prison for repeatedly violating the law on organising public meetings. This as hundreds of demonstrators are held in Moscow and St. Petersburg amid anti-corruption protests called by Navalny. And Gaza's Hamas rulers warn of renewed violence if Israel adheres to the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas's wishes and reduces its electricity supply to the isolated territory. You're very much up to date. More news headlines shortly.